I heard the sound of chainsaws before I even made it halfway down the hill. My name's Marcus Bell, and I've lived on the same lakefront property in Pine Hollow for nearly 12 years. Built the dock myself. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy wooden structure with a bench and a small boat lift. That dock saw late-night fishing trips with my son, summer barbecues, and even my brother's wedding photos. It was mine. Paid for, permitted, and inspected, so when I got home from a weekend trip and saw my dock in pieces scattered like driftwood across the shoreline, I nearly blacked out from rage. Standing proudly at the edge of the wreckage was none other than Helen Zimmerman. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like a holy relic. She was flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Helen, of course, looked thrilled. "Oh, Marcus," she said, not even trying to hide her smug satisfaction. "We had to take it down. It was a serious hazard. You should have read the updated guidelines." "What the hell are you talking about?" I barked. "You didn't give me any notice." "This dock's been here for over a decade, and it was approved long before you ever wormed your way onto the board." Helen clicked her tongue. "Well, the HOA's Aesthetics Committee determined it didn't match the updated shoreline appearance standards. It obstructed the natural view and didn't align with the new color palette." "Color palette? It's a dock, it's brown wood, it's on the water." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "That kind of tone isn't going to help your appeal process." I looked at the mess, wooden planks snapped in half, the bench completely destroyed, and even my fishing rod holder tossed into the lake. "You deliberately did this while I was out of town," I said. "You didn't even leave a notice." Helen smiled politely, but her eyes burned with that HOA power trip fire. "Per our bylaws, if a structure poses a risk or violates updated standards, the HOA reserves the right to remove it. Page 36, subsection 4. I stared at her, stunned. "You're insane." "Read the handbook, Marcus," she said, already turning to walk away. "You might learn something." She left me there, standing in the mud, staring at a massacre of lumber and memories. My neighbor, Tom, came walking over from the next property. "Did they seriously tear it down without warning?" he asked. I nodded. "Didn't even leave me a note." "I saw them out here yesterday morning," he said. Helen was directing the workers like she was running a military operation. "I thought maybe you approved it." "Nope," I said, already pulling out my phone. "But I'm going to make sure they regret it." I spent that night digging through old permits, photos, and emails, city approvals from over 10 years ago, inspection clearance. Even a thank you note from the HOA president back then, complimenting the dock for adding charm to the lakeside community. I scanned and organized everything. Then I filed a complaint with the county, followed by a lawsuit. Helen thought she was above the law. She was about to get a very expensive reminder. By Monday morning, I had already filed the lawsuit and sent copies of all my documentation permits, inspection records, and HOA correspondence from years ago to the county zoning office and the local news station. I wasn't bluffing. Helen Zimmerman had finally picked on the wrong neighbor, and I was going to drag her entire petty empire into the sunlight. At 8:30 sharp, I walked into the Pine Hollow Municipal Courthouse wearing a charcoal suit and holding a folder thick enough to need a rubber band. The clerk behind the counter gave me a once-over and motioned me toward the civil claims window. By the time I left, the court date was set. Later that afternoon, I received an email from a man named Ted Rusk, the HOA's attorney. He asked if I'd consider resolving the matter amicably without further escalation. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. This was the same HOA that had pulverized my dock behind my back, and now they wanted a friendly chat. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove down to the county assessor's office to request a certified copy of the plat maps and zoning records for my property, just to cover every angle. The woman at the desk, a sharp-eyed civil servant named Carla, narrowed her eyes as she scrolled through the records. "Wait a minute," she said. "These shoreline modifications were signed off on in 2012. That would have been under the old HOA leadership." "Correct," I said, which means the current board had no legal standing to alter anything without a new hearing or notice. She raised an eyebrow. You're going to want to talk to enforcement. She sent me down the hall to a cubicle where a man named Daryl sat surrounded by binders and a calendar from 3 years ago. When I explained what had happened, he pulled up the property file and whistled low. They filed a notice of violation against your dock 2 weeks ago, he said, frowning. But that's not how this is supposed to work. You should have received a certified letter and had at least 30 days to appeal before any action could be taken. They did it while I was out of town, I said. No letter, no email, not even a door hanger. Daryl typed something quickly, then clicked his tongue. They also hired a private contractor, not a licensed demolition firm. That's a violation on its own. And if they didn't pull a county permit for deconstruction, which it looks like they didn't, that's not just civil. That's criminal mischief. That got my attention. So what happens now? I asked. I'll file a formal incident report and notify the compliance office, he said. They'll launch an investigation, and if it goes far enough, the DA could get involved. That night, I got a call from Tom again, my neighbor who'd witnessed the demolition. You'll want to know this, he said. One of the guys who helped tear it down was bragging at the gas station about how they tossed your bench into the lake just for fun. Said Helen told them to make it look non-salvageable so you couldn't rebuild it from scraps. You're kidding, I said. Nope, my buddy works there. Said he overheard the whole thing. I hung up and drove straight to the station. The attendant, a kid named Jordan, confirmed the story. He even remembered the name on the contractor's van, Greenview Shoreline Services. I looked them up. No website, no license on file with the county. At that point, I looped in a lawyer. Her name was Danielle Ortega, and she came highly recommended for property and HOA disputes. When I showed her the evidence, she leaned back in her chair and let out a quiet, delighted laugh. They messed with the wrong guy, she said. You've got a clean paper trail, multiple violations on their part, and now potential criminal activity. I'll file a motion to compel discovery. If they try to stall, we can subpoena their meeting minutes and internal communications. 2 days later, Danielle forwarded me an audio file. Anonymous source, she said. Someone inside the HOA board is clearly fed up. The recording was from a board meeting. Helen's voice was unmistakable. I don't care if it's grandfathered in, she said. The dock is ugly and I'm sick of looking at it. We'll say it's a safety hazard. If he fights it, we bury him in fines. He's too stubborn to back down, but he's not going to outlast us. Another voice, someone older, responded, You know we're technically not allowed to do this without a hearing. Then don't take minutes on that part, Helen snapped. Don't write down anything you don't want read in court. She had no idea how prophetic that last line would be. By the time court day arrived, I had everything. The permit history, the zoning maps, the demolition photos, the gas station witness statement, the unlicensed contractor files. And now, thanks to the anonymous leak, a recorded admission of premeditated misconduct. Helen walked into the courthouse wearing a navy pantsuit and a forced half smile. She didn't look so confident once Danielle passed out the evidence packets to the judge and opposing counsel. Judge Rayner was a no-nonsense type. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a stare that could freeze boiling water. He flipped through the documents in silence, then looked up at the HOA's attorney. Is it true your client bypassed the required notice process and used an unlicensed contractor for this demolition? We haven't had time to conduct a full internal review, Ted Rusk said hesitantly. But if any procedural errors occurred, we're prepared to. Judge Rayner held up a hand. I'm not interested in spin. I'm interested in facts. The county compliance report confirms no permit was issued. That alone makes this a violation of state code. Add in the lack of notice, the absence of an appeal window, and the recorded intent to deliberately destroy private property. That's not just a tort, that's malice. Helen's face went pale. The judge continued. As for damages, I'm ordering the HOA to rebuild the dock to original specifications within 60 days using a licensed contractor of the plaintiff's choosing and at triple the estimated cost as punitive reparation. Helen's mouth dropped open, but the judge wasn't done. Furthermore, he said, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges relating to unauthorized demolition and falsification of HOA records. Danielle leaned over to me and whispered, "That's the legal equivalent of a knockout punch." When we stepped out of the courthouse, the local news van was already waiting. Apparently, the station had caught wind of the court filing and sent a reporter to cover the outcome. "Mr. Bell," she said, holding up a microphone, "how does it feel to win against the HOA?" "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about protecting your home from people who think they are above the rules. No one should have to fight this hard just to keep what's theirs." Across the street, Helen stood frozen on the courthouse steps, flanked by two other board members who looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. One of them peeled off and walked away without saying a word. I didn't even bother looking at her again. I had a dock to redesign. And this time, it was going to be even better than before. 3 weeks after the court ruling, the HOA's official newsletter arrived in my mailbox, a glossy 8-page spread printed on heavy stock paper, like they were trying to impress investors instead of informing residents. I hadn't bothered reading one in years, but this time I flipped it open. Page 3 held a short paragraph buried under landscaping reminders and pool hours. Due to a recent legal matter, the HOA will be reallocating budget resources to address compliance issues related to shoreline properties. We appreciate your patience as we work to uphold community standards. No mention of the court order. No mention of the triple cost rebuild. Just vague corporate speak trying to bury the fact that they'd been publicly humiliated, but the real fallout was happening behind the scenes. I didn't even have to ask around. Residents came to me. First it was Mr. and Mrs. Keeler, the retirees from across the street. Then it was Nina, who ran the daycare out of her home. They all had stories. Unapproved fines, threats of liens over mailbox paint colors, strange charges for amenities maintenance that nobody had ever seen applied. I found a charge for emergency lighting replacements on my statement, Nina said one evening while we stood on my driveway. But we haven't had a power outage in over a year. Have you ever seen them install any new lights? I asked. Nope, and I've lived here for 8 years. That was when I realized Helen's abuse of power went far beyond my dock. She'd been running the HOA like her own personal fiefdom, with a steady stream of unchallenged control over the neighborhood's coffers. Danielle advised me to file a formal request to inspect the HOA's financial records. Under state law, those were public to any dues-paying member. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, which was just a converted room in the clubhouse. A volunteer named Brent accepted it with a nervous nod, eyes darting toward the door like he expected Helen to burst in. 5 days later, I got an email. They'd scheduled a review of the records for the following Thursday afternoon. I brought Danielle along with a portable scanner. They gave us access to 10 binders, only 10. The HOA had been around for over 15 years and the records only went back 4. We started flipping through them. The first red flag hit within 20 minutes. There were 3 separate payments to a vendor called Lakeside Environmental Consulting. Each payment was just under $5,000 and labeled Shoreline Assessment. Danielle typed the name into the state contractor registry. No license, no address, no tax ID. "This company doesn't exist," she said, brows furrowed. "They're not registered anywhere." We kept going. Payments to Landform Design Group for community aesthetic evaluations. Same story, no business license, no online presence, just a P.O. box in another county. By the time we reached the last binder, we'd found over $30,000 paid to phantom vendors. Danielle took photos of every invoice. "They're laundering money through fake businesses," she said matter-of-factly. "Or someone is." And if these companies don't exist, then someone is cashing those checks personally. I sent everything to Daryl, the zoning official who'd helped me earlier. He promised to forward it to the county's fraud investigation division, but things escalated faster than I expected. The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans parked outside the HOA clubhouse. 2 plainclothes officers entered and exited with boxes of files. By noon, residents were gathering in front lawns, whispering and pointing. Helen's SUV was nowhere to be seen. That evening, I got a call from Brent, the nervous volunteer. "They showed up with a warrant," he said, voice shaking. "They took everything. Computers, binders, even the printer, said it was part of a financial misconduct investigation. Marcus." They asked for Helen by name. I didn't say anything. I just hung up and walked out to the shore. The new dock was already under construction. The contractor I'd chosen licensed, bonded, and very aware of the court oversight had made solid progress. The pilings were in, the frame was up, and the first plank stretched out over the water like a promise. It was going to be bigger than the original, better anchored, reinforced with composite decking. And this time, it would have a pergola at the end with solar lights. I stayed up late that night, sitting on a lawn chair with a thermos of black coffee, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake and wondering how deep Helen's corruption really went. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, the county prosecutor held a press conference. I watched it live on my laptop. Neighbors crowded around the screen in my garage. Following an investigation into financial irregularities within the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association, the prosecutor said, "We have filed charges against Helen Zimmerman, president of the HOA, for embezzlement, forgery, and criminal conspiracy." Gasps echoed around me as he continued. "Evidence suggests that Ms. Zimmerman created shell companies to funnel association funds into personal accounts. We estimate the total theft at over $75,000. Additional charges may follow pending further investigation." Nina put a hand over her mouth. Tom let out a low whistle. The prosecutor finished with a line that made my jaw tighten. "Funds were often disguised as payments for non-existent consulting services, including fraudulent shoreline assessments used to justify illegal property alterations. She'd used my dock as cover. That was never about aesthetics. It was about making up fake expenses and using the demolition to justify a check to one of her fake vendors." The crowd in my garage stood in silence as the screen faded to a news anchor. Then Tom spoke. "Looks like you did more than save your dock." The next HOA meeting was standing room only. For the first time in years, people actually showed up. Helen wasn't there. Of course, she'd been arrested 2 days prior and released on bail pending trial. Brent stood at the front, visibly sweating. "We need to elect a new interim board," he began. I didn't volunteer, but enough people wrote my name down that I was voted in as vice president. Danielle texted me the next morning. "You're going to be popular at City Hall for a while," she said. Half the town's HOAs just realized they don't know where their money's going. The dock was finished a week later. The contractor even added a custom plaque on the bench, just a small metal plate that read, "Rebuilt, reinforced, remembered." I didn't throw a party, I didn't make a speech. But that Saturday, I set a couple chairs out at the end of the dock and invited Tom and Nina to bring their families over. We grilled burgers, passed around lemonade, and let the kids toss stones across the water. No rules, no fines, no clipboards, just neighbors. And from the far side of the lake, I could see other residents watching. Some waved. A few even walked over. What started as a quiet protest had turned into something more, a community finally paying attention. A few weeks later, I was walking back from the mailbox when a man I didn't recognize pulled up in a city maintenance truck. "You Marcus Bell?" he asked. "Yeah," he handed me a manila envelope. Letter from the State Oversight Committee. "Thought you'd want it fast." Inside was confirmation that Helen's trial had been moved to a grand jury. Her assets were frozen, and the HOA was now under temporary state supervision until a full audit could be completed. Turns out, justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it demolishes what needs to be rebuilt. The wind coming off the lake was colder now, sharp and restless as fall edged in. I stood at the far edge of the dock, leaning against the new railing, watching a formation of ducks drift past like they owned the place. Underneath my boots, the boards were perfectly sanded and sealed, the lines even and tight. The contractor had finished ahead of schedule, and true to the court order, the HOA had footed every cent of the tripled invoice. But the story hadn't ended with Helen's arrest. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks after the prosecutor's announcement, I received a call from a detective with the Financial Crimes Unit. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Cara Mendoza and said she wanted to meet in person, preferably at my home. That wasn't the kind of request you ignore. She arrived the next morning in plain clothes, hair tied back, carrying a leather-bound folder and a quiet intensity that told me she didn't waste time. After a brief greeting, we sat at my kitchen table. She didn't ask if I wanted coffee. "I need to ask you some questions about a man named Rick Lorne," she said, flipping open the folder. "His name came up in the vendor records we seized from the HOA files. I didn't recognize the name. He's tied to 3 of the companies that received payments from the HOA," she continued. Lakeside Environmental Landform Design Group and another one called Shoreline Insight, all fake. Different names, same tax ID. That ID traces back to Lorne. So Helen was funneling the money to him. Cara locked eyes with me. "We believe she and Lorne were using the HOA's finances to launder stolen funds. What complicates things is that Lorne's already under federal investigation. He's been linked to a broader scheme involving fictitious consulting services defrauding multiple homeowners associations across the state." I leaned back in my chair, trying to wrap my head around the scope of it. "Wait," I said, "so Pine Hollow wasn't the only target?" "Not even close," she said. "We think Lorne embedded himself in HOA boards through proxies or personal ties. Helen's connection to him goes back years: college roommates, shared addresses, overlapping LLCs. She wasn't acting alone." She pulled out a printed bank statement and turned it toward me. "Recognize this name?" she asked, pointing to a transaction labeled Community Heritage Trust. I didn't. "That's the account receiving the largest transfers from the fake vendors. It's registered as a charitable organization. We're working with the IRS to freeze it." She paused, then added, "Your dock wasn't an isolated act of aggression. It was part of a deliberate pattern. They'd target properties with high visibility or valuable lakefront access, fabricate violations, and use the removal as a front to generate fake invoices." My stomach turned. "So what happens now?" "We're building a RICO case," she said. "Racketeering. It takes time, but it's moving." The gravity of it hit me in stages. What I'd thought was personal, vindictive, petty was part of a larger machine. My dock had been a cog in a wheel I hadn't even seen turning, but now it was grinding to a halt. The next day, the State Oversight Committee sent inspectors to the HOA's office. This time, they brought a forensic accountant and a representative from the State Attorney General's office. The clubhouse was sealed off with yellow tape by noon. Residents stood across the parking lot watching in stunned silence as boxes of records were loaded into unmarked vans. Brent, the interim board member, showed up later that evening at my door. His face looked years older than it had a few weeks ago. "I didn't know about the money," he said before I could say anything. "I swear, I thought she was just strict, overbearing maybe, but I didn't know it was criminal." I didn't say he should have caught it. I didn't say he'd looked the other way for too long. I just nodded once and let him talk. "They're asking us to hold a full community vote," he said. "State oversight ends once we have a certified board in place. They want transparency, public minutes, open books, everything." "You running?" I asked. He hesitated. "I was going to. But honestly, I think it should be someone who actually stood up when it counted." I didn't say anything to that either. Over the next several days, flyers were posted on mailboxes announcing the upcoming election. A town hall was scheduled in the community center, and for the first time since I'd lived in Pine Hollow, residents filled every seat. Folding chairs were brought in from storage. Voices were louder, questions sharper. This time, they wanted accountability. I didn't run, but I did endorse someone, Nina, the daycare owner. She was sharp, organized, and had already uncovered 3 budget discrepancies just from the records made public after the seizure. She won by a landslide. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the county clerk. It confirmed that all prior liens issued by the HOA under Helen's board were being reviewed for fraudulent basis. Residents who'd paid undeserved fines would be eligible for restitution. I scanned the list. My name wasn't on it. I'd never paid those bogus fees, but over 24 of my neighbors were. The new board held its first official meeting on a brisk Saturday morning. I stood at the back as residents voiced concerns, proposed new policies, and for once, left the meeting with answers. The entire proceeding was live-streamed on the HOA's new website, which included real-time budget tracking and a public calendar for inspections, maintenance, and board meetings. As for Helen, the grand jury delivered its indictment before the end of the month. 23 counts, including fraud, conspiracy, wire transfer abuse, and destruction of private property. Her bond was revoked after investigators discovered she tried to liquidate a hidden account in Nevada. She was taken into custody again without incident. Lorne was arrested in another state. The federal charges against him included wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud multiple homeowner associations across county lines. His trial would be a long one, but the case in Pine Hollow had become a centerpiece of the prosecution's evidence. One evening, as I was walking back from the shoreline, a couple I didn't know stopped me near the sidewalk. "You're Marcus, right?" the man asked. I nodded. "We just moved in, heard about what happened. The doc story, you really fought them." I shrugged. "Didn't have much choice." "No," the woman said, smiling. "You actually did. Most people would have let it go." I thanked them and continued home, but the words stuck with me. That night I sat out on the bench at the end of the dock, the one with the metal plaque, and watched the water reflect the stars. Across the lake, porch lights flickered on and off. Wind stirred the trees, and somewhere, a wind chime danced softly in the dark. What they'd tried to erase was still here, stronger, wiser, and this time we were all watching.